Greek mythology, their gods and monsters have captivated the world for centuries, so much so that we're still retelling the same stories from back then today. I wouldn't be amiss to say there are probably hundreds of different adaptations of these stories, from traditional plays to books to TV shows and films in the modern day. Modern perceptions lead some to be critical of actions taken by characters in the narrative. Take, for example, the myth of Persephone, which derives from the Homeric hymn to Demeter, wherein Hades kidnaps Persephone and forces her to marry him. In first world 21st century countries, this would be unacceptable. However, in ancient Greece, forced marriage was normal. Many young women and girls were forced to marry men they did not want to. Moreover, the forced marriage is just a plot device to get to the rest of the story. It's not even a central part of the story. The purpose of the Homeric hymn to Demeter was to explain the changing of the seasons. Because forced marriage was completely normal, and because the forced marriage was a plot device, a catalyst to lead to the rest of the events of the story, it wasn't something that ancient Greeks would really have pondered on far too much. However, with modern interpretations of the story and analysing it today, that's a massive problem within the story. Furthermore, more recent versions have recontextualized these myths to suit contemporary sensibilities, to course correct. Taking again the example of the Homeric hymn to Demeter, some versions in more modern times have made Hades and Persephone's relationship consensual, to abort the problematic elements of their original relationship. More Olympus is probably the most popular example of this, but it's far from the first version of this story to take this twist. And it isn't just modern contemporaries taking stories from ancient Greece and changing it to be more palatable in the modern day. This happened in ancient times as well. For example, the Romans took a lot of ancient Greek mythology and adapted it into Roman culture and society. A very minor instance of this is the myth of Heracles becoming the myth of Hercules, which is what the Romans called him. But of course, it goes even further back from that. Ancient Greece itself imported much of its ideas about its mythology from previously established societies. It's even further complicated by the fact that the previous societies and ancient Greece itself told its tales orally, not really writing much down, so we don't have a lot to go by until other societies such as the Romans, who did write things down, incorporated those parts of mythology into their work. There are evidently exceptions to this, for example, all of the Homeric hymns, for example, the Homeric hymn to Demeter and the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite. But what this means is there is no definitive version of a myth. Why am I telling you all of this? It's because for the defenses I'm about to make for the goddesses that I talk about in this video are based off of my own personal opinion and the mythology that I view to be the most reasonable based on a pattern of behaviour seen by goddesses in certain myths. Which is going to be slightly biased because I'm in fact a Greco-pagan. I don't believe that Greek gods are characters, I believe them to be beings. Let me contextualize it like this for you. There may be somebody who does believe in the idea of that one god, however doesn't subscribe to the idea that every single thing in the Bible, or even the majority of the things that happened in the Bible, actually happened. Some people may believe in God, but don't believe that an entire plague of locusts came down upon Egypt, or that Moses talked to a burning bush. In the same vein, I don't believe that every single event that happens within mythology actually happened. I also think it's a metaphor to display what kind of dominion each god has over the earth. For example, Demeter going across the earth and making all the crops wither displays her dominion over the harvest. I think it's important to make this disclaimer in this video because two of the goddesses at the very least in this video are ones that are my patron goddesses. I actively adhere to worshipping these goddesses. And the way that they're viewed in certain interpretations today is less than charitable. So we've already talked about the Homeric hymn to Demeter, so let's kick off with that, Demeter. Modern interpretations of Demeter see her as an overbearing, overprotective mother, when that is not the truth at all. Demeter is a fairly unique case because we actually have a written version of her myth, the Homeric hymn to Demeter, by, surprisingly, Homer. In the original mythology, it does not skirt around the fact that Persephone was taken against her will. He seized her against her will, put her on his golden chariot, and drove away as she wept. She cried with a piercing voice, calling upon her father, the son of Cronus, and the highest and the best. She was taken against her will at the behest of Zeus by her father's brother, who one makes many somata, the one who receives many guests. Like, it truly doesn't stutter. Persephone did not want to be taken. She cries out to her father to have her released, and then later on she cries for her mother, and her mother does the same. It's a story about two women being torn apart by the will of men. And yes, I do believe mythology to be just that, mythology and a story, and you're free to adapt it as you will. But it still rubs me the wrong way that many different modern interpretations decide to demonize Demeter for loving her daughter? I've talked specifically about why I think this is a misguided attempt to modernize this specific story in my video about deconstructing the damsel in distress. But in a nutshell, they attempt to improve and modernize the Homeric hymn to Demeter by taking away the damsel in distress trope from Persephone and shoving all of the stigma and demonization onto Demeter. They take everything bad from one woman and push it on to another, which in a story which is meant to illustrate the struggles of mothers and daughters and being forced into a society that makes them marry men they don't want to, separating mothers and daughters and illustrating that pain is a bit tone deaf. The problem herein isn't the original portrayal of Demeter. The original portrayal of Demeter is a kind and concerned mother who just wants her daughter back, and her daughter feels the exact same way. It's more so modern interpretations that have taken this idea and changed the story, which in turn changes the character of Demeter. So that's recent versions being recontextualized for the modern day, but what about modern analysis of the story and what it says about Demeter herself? Many people have criticized Demeter's actions for stopping the harvests, letting the crops die, and therefore bringing devastation upon humanity. I think it's important to note that Demeter is one of the less wrathful gods in Greek mythology. Like, on a scale of 1 to 10, she's like low tier. I don't believe that anything about Demeter that is said within history indicates that she was doing this out of malice. Thereafter, for 9 days did the Lady Demeter wander all over the earth, holding torches ablaze in her hands. Not once did she take of ambrosia and nectar, sweet to drink in her grief, nor did she bathe her skin in water. In the hymn, it's pretty clear that Demeter is acting out of grief and depression. She isn't doing this to spite humanity or to intentionally cause chaos. In the hymn, it states that she isn't eating or drinking ambrosia and nectar, which is the food of the gods. Consuming it can improve longevity and even instill immortality, and by her not doing so, indicates that she wants to die. She's also not bathing, and that's a common symptom of depression, letting go of one's hygiene. She's clearly in deep depression. She's not doing this just because she can. Overall, I think that the new portrayal of Demeter as being an overbearing, overprotective mother is not fair at all, and I think defeats the point, but also I think the original criticism of her in the Homeric hymn to Demeter being a callous, neglectful god of the harvest is also unfair. Let's move on to a controversial one. Athena. Now, Athena is the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. I find it really interesting how, even though ancient Greece was notoriously misogynistic, out of the two different gods of war, the one that is seen as superior is the female one. In ancient Greek philosophy, they highly regarded wisdom and strategy as being virtues, something that should be truly considered, and they believed that chaotic and aggressive warfare was inferior, and therefore there were two gods to represent this, Athena to represent the former and Ares to represent the latter. The controversy with Athena comes along with the myth of Medusa. Medusa was one of 3 Gorgons, and these are beings described as winged human females with living venomous snakes in place of their hair. Originally, Medusa was always a Gorgon. She was never a human. She didn't have anything to do with Athena to begin with. It wasn't until the Roman poet Ovid wrote a version of the Medusa myth that stated she was once a beautiful maiden, and she once had hanky-panky with Poseidon in the temple of Athena. Now, for those who aren't aware, Athena is a virgin goddess and she swore never to marry or be with a man, and therefore having hanky-panky in her temple is blasphemy. And so, according to this version of the myth, she was punished by being transformed into a Gorgon. This being the first version of the Medusa myth that incorporates Athena, we can take from it that Athena is a goddess of her virtue, and she stands by what she believes in and won't take anything from anyone disrespecting her temple. Later versions, however, incorporated the idea that perhaps Medusa was a priestess of Athena and that the act between her and Poseidon in the temple was not consensual, meaning that Athena's punishment was victim blaming. In the 20th century, feminists picked up Medusa and reassessed her tale and pinned her as a symbol of female rage and violence against women. This changes the traits of Athena from being a woman who is not down with disrespect and will not put up with it, to a woman who is petty and jumps to conclusions and is somewhat stupid. And I'm not buying that. Let's say that this version of the story is true, that Medusa was a priestess of Athena and it was non-consensual hanky-panky with Poseidon. I do not believe for a single second that Athena would take the side of Poseidon and believe that it was consensual, because number 1, she is the goddess of wisdom, and number 2, she knows what all Olympian male gods are like. She's a virgin goddess and she made that choice on her own because she knows them. And number 3, she dislikes Poseidon in particular. Before Athens was Athens, it was a city ruled by a man called Cecrops, and I'm probably saying that wrong. And both Athena and Poseidon competed to be the patron god of that city. They had a massive rivalry over this. They wanted that city, and in the end, Athena won the competition. And Poseidon was particularly salty about that. They haven't really gotten on, it's not something that's happened, and therefore she's probably going to be very suspicious of Poseidon, both because he's an Olympian god and they're all thoughts without any morals, and also because there's already an existing friction between them. Why would she believe that her priestess would be consensual with Poseidon in her temple? Quite frankly, the version of this myth is Athena slander, and I will not stand for it. If anything, she probably bestowed Medusa the gift of being able to turn men to stone by looking at them to protect her, which is also another interpretation of the myth, which I find a lot more reasonable than Athena, the goddess of wisdom, taking the side of her longtime rival. Ah yes, because the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and practical thinking would definitely take this course of action and blame the victim. It also isn't consistent with the character of Athena, considering that during the fall of Troy, Ajax the Lesser took Cassandra to an altar of Athena and violated her. In retaliation, Athena sent a storm, destroying the majority of his fleet. The second myth that gives Athena dissenters pause is that of Arachne. Arachne was a woman who was a really good weaver, and she once boasted that she was better at weaving than Athena, the goddess also of crafting, because she is just CEO in many different domains. Now, you probably shouldn't say that you're better at something than a god that has dominion over it. Just saying. And so Athena descends from the heavens and basically says, "Sis, what you saying?" And the pair have a weaving competition. Once they were finished, Athena looked at Arachne's work and realised that she had woven a piece that depicted the gods, particularly Zeus, misleading, mistreating, and tricking mortal. She had basically woven a propaganda piece against the gods in front of a god, and Athena was enraged that she was insulting the gods, but also she was enraged because the work was much better than what she had produced. She ripped Arachne's work to shreds and hit her on the head 3 times. Embarrassed and distraught, Arachne yeeted herself. The thing about this story is that it is also a story by the Roman poet Ovid. Other versions later on from this story have Athena simply turning Arachne into a spider on the spot and leaves out the part where she rips up her work, bonks her on the head, and Arachne offs herself. There is another version of the story, but this one, it's hard to tell whether it came before or after Ovid's. But Arachne was actually being tutored by Athena in weaving, and her brother Phalanx was being tutored by Athena in martial arts. But Athena discovered that the pair were engaged in hanky-panky, and Athena was disgusted by this, which is strange looking at the family tree of the Olympians. It's something she should be used to. But she punished them by turning them both into spiders, dooming them both to be eaten by their young. I can't really comment on whether or not the characterization of Athena has changed, because we don't know if this brother-sister one came before Ovid. But I would think it would be more reasonable for that to happen, because again, Athena is the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and practical thinking. So I would assume that maybe it would be more reasonable and practical of her to be upset with the brother-sister hanky-panky rather than the fact that there was somebody better at weaving than her. There are other stories as well that are before Ovid, but it's not really a story rather than a statement that Athena just hated spiders. Or there was a maid who challenged Athena to a weaving contest, but she lost her shape and then she just had to continue weaving forever, therefore her doing that was her own fault. But that version of the story was by a satirical writer, so it probably wasn't taken as part of the mythology. I'm guessing that this story was meant to illustrate the pettiness and hot-headedness of the gods, but again, Athena isn't really the best god to use as an example of this. It's completely out of left field for her. It makes no sense whatsoever. The only occasion I can think of Athena being rash and thoughtless is when she blinded Theseus for seeing her naked while bathing. She can't be calm and collected all the time, guys. She is a virgin goddess. They're particularly protective over their naked form. Let's move on to Hera, the goddess that probably gets the most flack because she keeps going after the children of Zeus. A lot of people say this is unfair because it's not their fault they were born and that her husband is a thought. So I guess we kind of need to talk about their marriage. In some versions, Hera seduces Zeus. In other versions, which from the characterization of Zeus is a lot more believable, he pesters her and wears her down. In one version, she hides in a cave to get away from him. It's a mortal named Achilles that convinces her to give him a chance, and no, not the hero Achilles, this is a different guy altogether. In another version, he conjures a storm and then transforms into a cuckoo, so that when the cuckoo flies by Hera, she takes pity on it and puts her cloak over it to protect it from the storm. He then transforms back into himself and promises that he won't just flip and chuck her, he'll marry her. Considering the fact that Hera is the mother of marriage and childbirth, this is a really important commitment to her. That's her whole thing. She is the woman of matrimony, married life, and childbirth. These things are sacred to her, and that's her domain. So imagine her dismay when she figures out that her husband is a cheater. Things reach a boiling point when the gods decide they're gonna try and overthrow Zeus, and Hera is totally up for this. She drugs Zeus and they all tie him to his throne. When he woke up, he was absolutely fuming and began shouting at all the gods. This was overheard by Aegeon, a giant who later came and untied Zeus. Upon realizing that Zeus was free, the gods went and flew down onto their knees begging for forgiveness, which Zeus gave to all of them, except Hera. Zeus chained Hera to the heavens all night, and she screamed in pain. The following morning, Zeus approached her and promised to let her go if she never went against him ever again. And so Hera did. She promised to never betray or plot against him ever again. But she made no such promise towards his illegitimate children, which is why in mythology you'll see Hera going after his offspring, but never him, because she feared the same punishment as she had before, being chained from the sky. Is it fair and just that she took out all of her rage on his offspring? Absolutely not. But Zeus tricked his way into many a woman's pants and made many a kid throughout the course of ancient Greece. And she was powerless to do anything about it. She could confront him, she could argue with him, but she couldn't physically stop him, because otherwise she'd end up back, chained by her arms to the heavens. And that's painful. I find it so unfair that all of these gods were involved in the plotting, and she was the only one punished. I understand that's his wife, but he spent so long badgering her and promised that he would be a good husband to her, immediately to take that back and begin cheating on her. Her, the goddess of matrimony and married life. And she played that role really well. From what I can tell, all of her children are pretty much all noted to be of Zeus. So she was faithful. He was not. She couldn't do anything about what he was doing. It was a catch-22. She couldn't act against Zeus, but she also couldn't have what her domain stood for disrespected in the way it was. And his illegitimate children were a symbol of that disrespect. I will say, she went super overboard, particularly when it came to poor Heracles. Mans did nothing wrong, and she ruined his life so many times. But did this stop Zeus from making his way through every single mortal woman, nymph, and other god that he could get his hands on? No, it did not. Forget Medusa, Hera should be a symbol of female rage. She put up with a lot. Could she give it as good as she got it? Absolutely. Was she ruthless? Yes. Is it understandable why she chose the targets that she did? Yeah. But she could have chilled, like a little bit. Slightly. Just a notch. However, I think the portrayal of her as simply a jealous, malicious wife isn't exactly fair either. What she is meant to represent, again, is marriage. That is her domain and it should be respected. And I think Hera is a symbol for women who have husbands that are unfaithful. That is the entire point of her story, being a woman trapped in a patriarchal society that does not respect women, their boundaries, and what it means to be committed to them. Her myths are the personification of the double standard of fidelity between men and women. Zeus can go around having all of the affairs that he likes, but the moment somebody gives Hera some bedroom eyes, they're gone. Zeus did not tolerate any man lusting after his wife. Ironic, isn't it? This section is less so to defend Hera from her actions, but more so to bring understanding as to why she did what she did, and what she represents in mythology as a whole. The struggle of women trying to find their place in the world while having to face double standards when compared to their male counterparts. The portrayal of her in ancient Greek myth is possibly the most misogynistic out of these three goddesses that it gets. See what I mean by Greece was inherently misogynistic back in the day, the way that they made Hera this raging villain, when she had good reason to be. So I think I've talked about Greek gods for a really long time, but what I wanted to do was look at these Greek goddesses and their characteristics and how those play out in myths in a metaphorical sense, how things might have changed throughout time and how we perceive them, and how modern interpretations of these myths can actually be more harmful than the original myths. Which is ironic, again, because ancient Greece and misogyny were like best friends. If you got this far in the video, comment down a bird emoji or something, and you can check out all of my social media, including my Patreon, in the description below. And I'll see you guys soon. Bye.